Okay, so I've already made a video similar to this about vertebrates, so I figured why not do one about invertebrates. So let's just get into it. The first class, Porifera, contains some of the most unique animals on our planet, and also some of the most primitive, sponges. What's incredibly unique about sponges is that they have none of the things we think are essential for life. No nervous system, no digestive system, no circulatory system, and no organs. Sponges are pretty much just a giant cluster of cells that stay together. All they do is filter feed their entire life and reproduce, usually by themselves, which is kind of weird to think about. Anyways, they feed through filter feeding, letting their little ostia take in all the small bits of nutrients that the water brings for them. They really be living by that one line in the greatest show of all time.
The sea is always right!
The sea is always right!
An adult sponge will be attached to a single surface and stay there for the rest of its life, only moving if the surface moves as well. And that's actually pretty sad, not gonna lie. The next class, Nidoria, contains a silent sea, but it also contains sea anemones, corals, and jellyfish. This group is a bit harder to identify since all three of these are pretty different from each other. Sea anemones and jellyfish obviously have some very potent venom, with species like the box jellyfish, which, surprise surprise, lives near Australia,
Not good, too much drinking.
being some of the most deadly animals in the world. Now, coral reefs are pretty unique since they're pretty much a combination of two different species just working together. One being the polyp, which creates a hard calcium carbonate shell around itself, and the other is a certain type of algae which provides nutrients for the polyp through sunlight, and the polyp provides a defensive shell for the algae. Now, over hundreds, thousands, maybe even millions of years, big groups of these polyp and algae combinations come together and form the greatest ecosystem in the entire ocean. Coral reefs contain much of the ocean's biodiversity. So the polyp gets its mukbang level of sunlight nutrients, and the algae gets a very good security system. It's actually really fascinating to think that this is actually what creates one of the most diverse ecosystems on the planet. But anyways, let's move on. The next class, Platyhelminthes. I didn't look up how to pronounce any of these, by the way, so these guys are soft-bodied little critters, and they often live parasitic lives, like many people. Yeah, so funny, haha. Their digestive system is extremely simple, being made up of a mouth, and that leads to a gastrovascular cavity. Jesus Christ, I can't talk today. And some of them, like the pleasant tapeworm, gets nutrients through their skin. They have 3 embryonic tissue layers, which apparently makes them more complex than their previous classes. They also have a primitive nervous system with something called cerebral ganglia, which is essentially an extremely simple and primitive brain. And they also have some longitudinal nerve cords which help with basic movements and coordination. This class is a bit weird and really gross, so I think we should move on. So let's move on to Nematoda, which is just as weird and just as gross as Platyhelminthes. Again, I don't know how to pronounce any of these. Now, Nematoda contains hookworms and other parasitic worms. This group is a step above the rest for a couple of reasons. First off, they're the first class that has a complete digestive system, and what I mean by that is they have 2 holes, one that is their mouth and the other is their ass. They also have a bit more of an advanced nervous system, but most importantly, this is the first class where there are 2 genders or sexes or whatever you want to call it, so you can rest easy knowing that there might be a beautiful hookworm couple living inside of you right now. Oh, so beautiful. I'm gonna cry. I'm gonna cry because I want to kill myself. The last group of worms, Annelida, contains things like earthworms and leeches. Now, what makes this group very interesting is the fact that their bodies are split into different segments, allowing pretty much every single segment to operate with its own mini little nervous system and circulatory system and digestive system. This means that if they're cut in half, you haven't just killed one, you've just created an extra. So, how do these things work, you ask? I have no idea. Another thing that separates these guys from the previous two is the fact that they have a much more advanced circulatory system. Now, these last two classes are really the ones that we think of when we think of invertebrates. The first one is mollusca, which contains snails, clams, and octopuses. This class is distinct for their extra squishy and soft bodies, but many of them also produce a hard defensive layer of calcium carbonate. This is what snails and clams have, for example. However, cephalopods like squid and octopus don't have this. Now, most of these animals are still very simple, with primitive nervous systems and very basic circulatory, digestive systems, all that. But also, this group contains some of the most intelligent animals in the world, and by far the most intelligent invertebrates. Cephalopods have a nervous system that is so much more complex than anything we've discussed so far. They have complex problem-solving level brain IQ, big brains. They don't need to produce these hard shells that these other species do with a special organ, by the way, called a mantle. They don't need it, because they can just grab 2 coconut shells and then use those for protection, or something along those lines. They can also change their colors, obviously, with possibly the most advanced form of this color-changing little ability that we see in nature. So yeah. But now, let's move on to the very last class of invertebrates. Arthropoda, or arthropods. Now, this is the most iconic group of invertebrates by far. This is the group that contains insects like pretty much all bugs, crustaceans, which contains all bug-like things that live in the ocean or even freshwater. I don't know why I said ocean. They also live in freshwater. Arachnids, which contains all spiders, and myriapods, which contains millipedes and centipedes. Now, I could spend an entire video on every single one of these. They all have unique characteristics and traits, unique adaptations, infinite ways that they survive and thrive. And that's not a surprise, considering that Arthropoda is the largest phylum in the animal kingdom. They have segmented bodies, usually a hard exoskeleton, joints, and many of them go through some form of metamorphosis. Now, like I said, I could spend an entire video just talking about these guys, but yeah, if you want that, then like, share, subscribe, comment. But I will leave it here for now. Okay, so there's one more class that I forgot to discuss, and it's Echinodermata, I believe that's how you pronounce it. This class includes things like sea urchins and sea stars. Okay, so they have an endoskeleton, which is made out of calcium carbonate. They also don't have a head or a brain. They have regeneration abilities, and they have no circulatory systems. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll see you in the next one.